Tonight, I want to we're gonna read this passage, but I want to kind of camp here for a minute or two, and I have some thoughts I want to share about something that does not get talked about very often in church, but I think it's something that we need to really. I actually think it's something that gets overlooked quite a bit in churches and in Christianity in general, and I'll tell you what I mean in a second, but. If you remember, Jesus, right now we're at the point in our story of the life of Christ where the last couple times that we've studied, we've seen that Jesus and the Pharisees the conflict is getting more and more. And you know where it's going. Eventually, it's going to get to the point where they are going to kill him. And that is not a surprise to Jesus, but they are the tension is building and building and building, and Jesus is actually, I know a lot of people don't see it this way, but I'm just going to tell you, Jesus is being purposely antagonistic to their teaching, to their doctrine. He's opposing it because it's wrong, and it's not according to the word of God, and it's not according to what God originally intended. They had taken it and they had corrupted it and they had twisted it and they had made it something that was unrecognizable to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jesus was there to restore what God had intended for things to be. He was the Messiah, the promised Messiah, and he was presenting himself as such. Last week we looked at where he rode into Jerusalem, which is a major fulfillment of prophecy. The way he did it, how he did it, what he, riding on the donkey, that was all predicted hundreds and hundreds of years before it ever happened. Jesus did it and he fulfilled it, and he was presenting himself one more time as, I am your Messiah, I am your Savior. Here I am, the one you've been waiting for, the one all the way from the Garden of Eden, when Jesus said the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent, the promised deliverer. That is who Jesus is, and that's what he was presenting himself to be. I am the long-awaited king that you've been waiting for. But he wasn't accepted. They did not receive him. They knew who he was too, by the way, and they didn't care. They said, we don't want this man. We want to take the inheritance for ourselves. That's what the Pharisees were saying in their heart. They wanted the control. They wanted the power. They wanted to have the people under their influence and control. And so now we're going to see, so the Pharisees, he is making them look bad in public a lot. He's putting egg on their face, so to speak, a lot in front of the people, and it's not making them look good. So now they're going to try a different approach, okay? They're going to try a different approach now. So verse 20, here's what it says. It says, and they watched him, okay? Okay, first of all, look at that. They watched him, okay? They watched him and sent forth, what? Spies, which should feign or pretend themselves to be just men, that they might take hold of his words, so that they might deliver him unto the power and the authority of the governor. So you got to get the picture here. The one-on-one direct approach in public wasn't working out so good for them, was it? Every time they would do that, it would kind of go bad for them, right? When they faced off with Jesus, they lost, okay? And they looked foolish. So now it says they watched, and then it says they sent forth spies, which would feign themselves to be just men, or pretend to be godly, pretend to really want to follow his teachings, okay? Why? So that they might take hold of his words, right? And turn him over to the power and authority of the governor. Do you see what's happening here? It's a setup, okay? It's a setup, okay? And they asked him, saying, Master, we know that thou sayest and teachest rightly, neither acceptest thou the person of any, but teachest the way of God truly. So what's the tactic? Flattery. Master, you're such a good teacher. You always teach right. You always teach good. Man, you are just so wonderful, right? So this is the tactic, right? And then they throw in a red herring question. Is it lawful, verse 22, is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar or not? Okay? Is it lawful for us to get tribute to Caesar or not? You get what they're asking? Jesus, we know you're not afraid to tell the truth about anything, okay? So tell us, should we be paying taxes to the Roman government? Should we be paying taxes to Caesar? Okay, now, on the surface, this looks like they have him trapped, because if he says, yes, you got to pay taxes to Caesar, that's going to anger the Jews, because they're going to call him a traitor, and they're going to say, you're not faithful and loyal to Israel if you're saying that we got to pay taxes to the government. But if he says, no, we don't have to pay taxes to the Roman government, then they got him, because now they can turn him over to Pilate and say, Pilate, this guy, he's saying to break the law. He's you see, so they believe that they've got him in a position where no matter how he answers, he's going to lose. Supposedly, right?
It's so funny.
Supposedly, right?
He's got him by their shoulders.
Right. So then it says, verse 23, but he perceived their craftiness. Now that word craftiness, it's the same word when it talks about how the devil tempted Eve. The same when Paul talks about, how the devil with subtlety tempted Eve. It's the same word that is used here. It's a satanic thing, okay? It's an evil, it's from the devil. It's a tactic that the devil uses, and they are his willing servants right now, and he's using them, and Jesus is perceiving their what? Their craftiness. Okay? Yep. And he says, why tempt you me? Okay, he just calls them out. He goes, listen, guys, I know what you're up to. I know why you came here. You're not fooling anybody, right? And then he says, show me a penny. Whose image and superscription hath it? And they answered and said, Caesar's. Okay? So he says, give me one of your coins. Okay, who's that on there? Whose image is that? And they said, oh, it's Caesar's. And then look what he says. And he said unto them, render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, or be Caesar's, and unto God the things which be God's. And they could not, now look at this, they could not take hold of his words before the people, and they marveled at his answer and held their peace. Okay? You get the picture? Jesus said, now, I want you to notice something. Now, this is important for us, guys, as the Church of Jesus Christ in America. We need to understand that we are in a country that has a governing body, a government, a law over us, right? The governor, the Caesar, if you will, okay? It's our government, okay? But there's different jurisdictions, and in this, Jesus is making a distinction between the things that are under Caesar's jurisdiction and the things that are under God's jurisdiction. Now, ultimately, God is over all, okay? But he has set up the world the way it is now, where there's a civil government. And that civil government, we're told in the Bible specifically, has been put there by God to keep order. In other words, to keep people from just lawlessness, doing whatever they want to do, hurting, harming people, all that stuff. The government has the sword, and they are to keep order in the land. That's their jurisdiction. And to also collect taxes. We see that in Scripture as well. We see that the church people in the book of Acts and in the Gospels, Jesus himself paid taxes out of the mouth of a fish. He got a piece of money and he paid his taxes, okay? So if Jesus did it, that's an example. We need to do the same thing. We need to be law-abiding citizens, and if there's a tax required, we pay the tax. Now, what we're not required to do is when the Caesar steps into a realm or a jurisdiction that is not his. And let me give you a really good example. We just got through it a couple years ago, and that is during the COVID, when the government was telling churches, you can't meet together. You can't be together. You can't sing in church. You can't fellowship. There can only be 25 people, no more than that. Okay? Do you understand that the government overstepped their bounds? They had no jurisdiction to do that. That was not their place. And so whenever the government overreaches, first of all, we need to be aware as Christians where that line is. Now, one time I asked a pastor where that line was, and I said, well, where do you draw the line? When the government's doing this, where do you draw the line? He says, well, when they tell me what I can and can't preach, then that's the line. But I said, but they're already telling you can't even have church. I said, you're not going to have anybody to preach to if they don't allow you to congregate. I said, so where's the line? Where do we draw the line? We need to know as the church where that line is, guys.
Not to forsake the gathering of ourselves.
That's right.
And
You just said it. The Bible makes it very clear. We are not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together. And if you look that word up, it means everybody together in one place. That's what it means. Literally, it means everybody together in one place. So that's what the church is supposed to do. We need to be obedient to that. Okay? Now, I want to hit on something else here that is, again, I mentioned it at the very beginning, and it's something that is not talked about a lot in church, but I think it's neglected, and I think we need to talk about it because it's something that happens and is happening every day, all the time, in churches all over the world, and especially, I would say, in the American church. Have you ever asked yourself why, if we rewind about 50 years, okay, just those of you that have been around for a while, rewind about 50 years and think about what the church was like 50 years ago. It was a lot more powerful. There was a lot more influence in the community and in people's lives. There was a lot more people that were hearing the gospel. There was a lot more people getting saved.
Billy Graham was still
Okay.
on TV.
Right. Okay. Have you ever asked yourself, why is it so much different now than it was even 50 years ago? And you go back 200 years ago, it was even more of a drastic difference, but I just did 50 because that's something that most of us can kind of look back and we can kind of see from history, right? Okay? Now, I want to talk about something that is not talked about very much, but it needs to be, and that is the subject of infiltration. Do you know what I mean by infiltration? Everybody, do you understand the meaning of that word? Okay? It means that there's an old saying, if you can't beat them, join them, right? If you can't beat them, join them, right? So the devil cannot defeat or beat churches outright. He's not going to be able, if he comes in his full power and reveals himself and says, I'm the devil, I'm bringing all my servants, and I'm going to come against all your servants, and we're going to see who wins, power against power, he's going to lose that confrontation against the church. Why? Well, because if the church knows that it's being threatened directly in that way, what is the church going to do? They're going to pray, they're going to seek God, they're going to fight, they're going to resist, okay? Infiltration is a different tactic of war. It's another aspect of spiritual warfare that we aren't really talking about very much in the church today, and we need to. And I would beg you, listen to what I'm going to say. Just let me talk for a minute and let me explain what I mean by infiltration, because I believe it's happening in, I would say, just about every church in America is being infiltrated. Okay, now these guys, we see the picture of infiltration in verse 20 when it says they watched him and they sent forth spies to pretend themselves to be just men so that they might take hold of his words and turn and set him up. Okay, now there's three kind of infiltration that I want to talk about. The first one is the government infiltration. Now this isn't happening as much in America, but it's happening in communist countries like China, Russia, these other places that have, and that is where government agents will be sent into churches to monitor what those churches are teaching, to make sure that they're not teaching any kinds of, like in China, let's just put it this way. In China, you are not allowed to teach in the book of Revelation. You are not allowed to teach about the Jesus Christ coming back again. You are not allowed to teach about any of those quote unquote apocalyptic themes in church. You're not allowed to do that. That is against the law in China. Now, that's a drastic overreaching of jurisdiction. The government does not have jurisdiction to do that, but that's what they're doing in China. They're also sending in infiltrators, people to come in that are pretending, now listen, they're pretending to be Christian. And they're doing that for the purpose for the church to lower its defenses and accept that person as one of their own. Do you understand what I mean? Because that's what an infiltrator does. An infiltrator is not going to come they're not going to come with a black, dark, evil look about them and red eyes, red glowing eyes. They're going to come as a sweet, little, innocent person that I just want to know Jesus. I just want to accept the Lord into my life. And I know that I'm a sinner and I need Christ. And they're going to say all the right words. They're going to have, I've seen it. I've actually personally seen it where they come forward and they pretend to accept the Lord. But you know what? They're not Christian. And they're not there for good reasons. They're there for bad reasons. And that leads me into my second type of infiltration, is the occult infiltration into the church. Now, you've got the government infiltration into the church, and they're monitoring and they're doing their thing. They're making sure that the church is towing the line, and they're watching the church and monitoring, right? But then you've got the occult side. Now what you need to understand about the occult side is they are directly at war with the Church of Jesus Christ. Their mission is not to govern the church or control it. Their mission is to destroy it. And what I mean by destroy, I mean there are people that are practitioners in Satanism, witchcraft, the occult, and their job is to go into a church and to cause chaos, to cause division. Okay? Now listen, what do I mean by that? Let me tell you, if you have somebody that comes into the church and they're causing arguments and they're causing strife, they're coming in with this, they know doctrine, they know the Bible, and they're straightening everybody out, trying to go to everybody and straighten them out. Okay? Now listen, when you see that going on, you need to understand something. That person, if they're causing strife and division and they're sowing discord, they are an infiltrator, period, the end. They're not there for good reasons, and you need to watch out. You need to be aware of them. You need to be aware of what they're doing. You need to be aware of what their whole purpose is for doing what they're doing, okay? Pay close attention to that. Pay very close attention to that. There are people, and that's their whole mission, is they want to shut the church down. They want to destroy it. They hate it. They hate Jesus, and they hate anybody that belongs to Jesus. And they don't care what they have to do to make that happen. They're going to come in and they're going to say all the right words. They're going to pretend to be a person of integrity, a person that is godly, but all the while behind the scenes there's war, okay? And you might say, well, Ben, I've never heard of anything like that before. The Bible is filled with it. Okay, the Psalms, David talks a lot about they bless with their mouth, but they curse inwardly. Their words were smoother than butter, but war was in their heart. Okay, you see, it's since the beginning of time these things have been going on. It's not anything new. In the Bible, Jesus talked about, if you remember the wheat and the tares. He said, while the man slept, the farmer slept, the enemy came in at night, think about this, and threw tares in with the wheat. Nobody knew about it. The farmer didn't know that somebody had come in, an enemy had come in and thrown tares in among his wheat. He had no idea that was going on until the crop started coming up. And he's like, what's going on here? This isn't wheat. This is tares. So my point is, I want you to look at the fruit of your church. I need to look at the fruit of my church. And if the fruit of our churches is not good fruit, if we're seeing bad fruit or tares or problems or issues, that means, okay, now you listen, if you see that, if a church is struggling and there's a bunch of problems, What that means is that church has been infiltrated. Pure and simple. That's what it means. We need to be aware of this. Nobody really talks about this stuff very much because they think, oh, it's just being paranoid. Is it? Almost every book of the New Testament warns about false teachers and false doctrines coming in, doesn't it? It's all throughout the Bible, guys. It's all there. Jesus warned about it several times.
Going back to the Garden of Eden.
All the way back.
Right
He
from the
was
very beginning.
he was an infiltrator, wasn't he? He was a shiny, bright, beautiful serpent.
He crept in that garden.
And when he came to Eve and he spoke to her, it was like, hey, I'm just like you, God, you're just not understanding God right. He didn't really mean that. And even if he said that, that's not really what's going to happen. You can listen to me. You can trust me. And she did. And look what happened because of that infiltration. So my point is that is something that we need to be very aware of. And I want to talk about one more kind of infiltration, and that is the religious infiltration of the Roman Catholic Church into all churches. Okay? Did you hear what I just said? This is important. We need to understand this. The infiltration of the Roman Catholic Church into all churches that are Protestant or not Roman Catholic. Now, there's a lot of people don't understand that the Catholic Church has a military arm called the Jesuit order. Okay? The Jesuits are specifically designed to bring down any non-Catholic church and bring them into subjection to the Pope. And you might say, well, how do they do that? Well, let me explain how they do that. They do it by infiltration. Okay? Do you know that when they're going to infiltrate a church, they spend years and years being taught what that denomination teaches, what their teachings are, what their doctrines are, how they believe, the lingo that they talk. They're trained in all of those things before they ever send them in, and then they send them in. Now, you might say, Ben, I think you're being just a little bit paranoid. I think you need to look into those things for yourself, but I will assure you that in every church, and I'm going to promise you this. I'll make you a promise, and you can hold this, you can take this, you can call me crazy, whatever you want to call me, but I'm going to tell you the truth. In every single church that is not Roman Catholic, they have an agent watching and observing and keeping tabs on that church. And that person, whoever they are, or people, they are reporting everything that goes on in that church. The strengths of that church, the weaknesses of that church. And the purpose of that is to bring that church underneath Rome. Okay? Now, you might say, well, how do you know that, Ben? Because if you read Revelation 17, if you read the book of Revelation, chapter 17, you're going to read about the whore of Babylon, okay? And you're going to read about the woman that rides the beast. And that woman that rides the beast is the last days apostate church, the one world religion. And that church is the Roman Catholic Church. It's headed up by Rome. Rome is going to be in control of it. Rome is going to dominate that. They are going to control everything. Now, you need to understand what I say. When I say Roman Catholic, I don't mean the people. I don't mean the people, the Roman Catholic people that go to Mass and church. I'm talking about the Roman Catholic institution. Most of those people have no idea what they're involved in. They don't know the teachings of that institution. They don't understand what they're up against in that situation, okay? So I'm talking about the ones that are at the top, the ones that are at the city on 7 hills in the Vatican. The Vatican is its own country, okay? Now, the Bible tells you that the woman is that city that reigns over the kings of the earth that is on 7 hills. That is Rome, okay? There's no question about that. There's a lot of people that like to argue about that, but there's no question about the fact that that is Rome, okay? And so we need to understand that these things are happening. And why am I talking about this? Because Jesus said that he wanted us to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. That's what we're to be. So we need to understand that these things are happening. And I would just tell you this. You don't take anything I'm saying to you at face value. What I would beg you to do is Go before the Lord with an open Bible and an open heart, and just ask God, you go to him and you ask him, Lord, if this is really going on in my church, would you please show me how this is happening? Because I don't really see it the way Ben is describing. So I would really want you to help me understand, that you would just help me understand to see what it is that I need to be looking for, what it is that I need to be watching for, what it is that I need to be aware of. And if you'll do that, I will promise you, God will help you. He will show you what I'm telling you, is either not true and that's not happening at my church, or yes, that's going on at my church. Now, I will tell you guys, one of the evidences that this is going on is the church is very weak in America. The church is very impotent and weak in America. And the reason why it is, you remember what Paul said about leaven? He said a little bit of leaven, what does it do?
Leaven's the whole lump.
The whole lump gets leavened, guys. Okay, now let me tell you something else about Rome. You need to understand about Rome and their infiltration. Whoever and whatever minister, if you start seeing them compromise and say, yeah, Roman Catholics are Christians just like us, they're believers just like us, their doctrine is the same as our doctrine, that's a big red flag, you guys.
That's a Rhodium.
Their doctrine is not the same as our doctrine. They do not believe in the scripture like we believe in the scripture. They do not believe the same things that a Bible-believing Christian believes. And you need to understand that. You've got to look at that for yourself. As a matter of fact, people that are Bible-believing Christians like you and I, if that's what you are, Rome looks at you as an enemy and as a heretic. And if you study history, you know what they did to heretics. They tortured them, they burned them, and they destroyed them with the attempt to wipe them out. So we need to understand these things, guys. This is very, very important. And I'm not saying this for no reason. I'm trying to plead with you because I believe all the churches around here, all of them, have to some degree been infiltrated by these three different kinds of infiltration. But especially the Roman Catholic one, because that one is the one where they want world control. They want to control all the world religions. Now, what you need to understand is the Pope, he doesn't care if you're a Mormon. He doesn't care if you're a Jehovah's Witness. He doesn't care if you're an evangelical Christian, as long as you acknowledge him as the head of the church. He doesn't care. But see, if you acknowledge him as the head of the church, you're denying Christ as the head of the church. Do you see that? And if you deny Christ as the head of the church, you are anti-Christ. Are we clear on that? That's very important. We need to understand that very clearly. Okay? So this is why, people say, well, Ben, why do you talk about the Roman Catholic Church like that? I do it because you have to understand the great threat that it is to Bible-believing Christianity. Everywhere where they have control, they will destroy the Christian church, the real Christian church. So you need to understand that. You need to get that in your mind, and you need to, as a faithful Bible-believing Christian, you need to be watchful and vigilant to that kind of stuff going on in your church. You might say, well, how do I know? Things like, people will get up and say things like, well, we need to pray for this Pope that he makes the right decisions. And No. You don't pray for an antichrist person that is saying that they are Jesus on earth, and that's what the Pope says he is. You don't do that. You cannot do that. Okay?
I wish Vance hadn't gone there.
So we just need to understand, guys. Okay? Look into these things for yourself. And I'm gonna end tonight, but I wanted to really hit on that point of infiltration. Ask the Lord to show you. Ask him. Say, God, if there's infiltration in my church, show me where it is. I want to know. I want to see. I want to understand what it is that I need to be looking for. God is the one that's going to show you. When Jesus was faced with these guys, when they came to him and they flattered him, notice they really buttered him up too, didn't they? They're like, oh man, you're such a good teacher. That's a tactic of infiltrators. They will come and flatter because guess what? By flattering, it gets you to lower your guard. It gets you to lower, you'll be, oh yeah, thank you so much, And before you know it, they're just, they're right in your inner circle and they're not a friend. They're an enemy. That's Sun Tzu's Art of War. That's exactly what they're doing. And so anyway, is there any questions about that? If you want any resources about those things, if anybody's interested in more of an in-depth understanding of that, I would be happy to give you some references and some things but mainly study the Word of God.
What is the Vatican? Isn't that like their major?
Yeah, the Vatican is the little, I think it's like
What do you find?
2.5 square miles. That's St. Peter's Basilica, that's where the Pope sits on
And
his
it's got
chair.
every god you can imagine. They
Right.
got so many
Right.
idols in there.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's a scary thought. Mm-hmm. It's a scary thought about that place. And
It is.
That's not Christian.
Right. But,
They want to splash a little water and say they've just baptized you
right,
by sprinkling water in your
right.
face.
Mm-hmm.
What's that mean? Mm-hmm. It isn't being buried and risen in
Well,
newness of life.
Well, and
It's
that's,
spiritual wickedness in high places. That's all that
right,
is.
right. So, you're right, John, and that's very true. But this is the point. This is my whole point, guys, is that the devil, he doesn't lead you astray all at once. It's in increments. It's little steps. It's little steps of compromise, right? And then pretty soon,
They want to put
He's
that
got
chip
you.
in you. So
Yeah,
you
well,
don't even think for yourself anymore.
well, for
You're
example,
gonna do that.
you've heard the story about the bird and the cat. Okay, now I know this is kind of a simplistic story, but bear with me because it's a story about compromise. Okay, the one day, the cat couldn't catch the bird because the bird would just fly away. Okay, so the cat came to the bird and he made a deal with him. He says, I will feed you every day if you just give me one of your feathers every day. I'll take care of you. I'll do everything. I'll give you food every single day. You won't want for anything. I'll take care of you, right? So every day that bird gave him one of his feathers. Just one feather every day, right? Okay. Then finally the day came when that bird didn't have any feathers anymore because he had compromised so much. And guess what? The bird's like, well, where's my food? And he's like, nope, no food today. And he ate him. Do you understand? Do you get the story? That's what compromise is. That's what compromise is. It's little increments, little things that we put up with. Oh, I guess that's not that bad. And then before you know it, we get led down a road.
That's how I explained it to the kids and everything. I used a road analogy where, you want to get to heaven, and there is nothing. It's not a straight way or anything. There's going to be curves. There's going to be obstacles. There's going to be whatever. But if you stay on God's path, you'll get to heaven. But then the devil will throw shortcuts or this is easier or you don't got to do that or something. And it looks like it's a straight stretch to heaven, but it's not. It goes like completely away from it and everything. But if you stay on the more difficult path, which is the true path, then you'll get to your destination.
So anyway, is there any other questions about that? Just thought that was a real important thing to cover tonight. Watch out, be aware, and by the